Picture this. You're sitting at your in-laws' dinner table, and your husband of 4 years looks his father dead in the eye and says, "She can't cook, she can't clean, she's completely useless." His entire family bursts into laughter while you sit there, completely humiliated. But here's the thing they didn't know. 3 days later, at our anniversary dinner, when the head chef walked out of the kitchen and announced to the entire restaurant, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner of Bella Vista." My husband's fork hit the floor so hard it echoed through the room. I'm Maya Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I went from being called useless to watching my husband's entire family realize they had no idea who they were dealing with. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters in this disaster of a family dinner. First, there's my husband David Chen, 35 years old, works in marketing, drives a leased BMW, and thinks he's God's gift to the business world. When we met 4 years ago at a networking event, I thought he was charming, ambitious, and different from other guys I'd dated. He seemed genuinely interested in my career goals and supportive of my dreams. Boy, was I wrong about that last part. Then there's his father, Robert Chen, a 62-year-old retired businessman who thinks every conversation is a board meeting and every woman should know her place. This man has never met an opinion he didn't want to share or a person he didn't want to judge. He's the type who asks waitresses if they're working their way through college and then gives unsolicited advice about their life choices. Robert built his plumbing supply company from the ground up, which he mentions approximately every 15 minutes, and he believes that makes him an expert on everything from politics to parenting. His wife, Linda Chen, is 58 and has been a housewife for 30 years. Now, I have nothing against housewives. It's an incredibly important job, but Linda wields her domestic skills like a weapon, constantly making other women feel inadequate if they can't fold fitted sheets into perfect squares or whip up a 5-course meal from leftovers. She's the queen of passive-aggressive comments wrapped in Southern sweetness, even though she's from Ohio. And then there's Jessica Chen, David's 29-year-old sister who works in finance and thinks she's the next Wolf of Wall Street. Jessica is one of those women who believes that putting down other women somehow elevates her own status. She's never been married, but she's got plenty of opinions about how wives should behave. She's constantly making comments about how her future husband will never have to worry about dinner because she's not like other girls. Here's what they didn't know about me. I'm not just Maya Rodriguez, the woman who supposedly can't boil water without burning it. I'm Maya Rodriguez, graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, former executive chef at 3 different restaurants, and the owner of the most successful new restaurant in the city. But I kept that secret because, well, David's family had made it crystal clear what they thought a good wife should be. From day one, they compared me to David's ex-girlfriend Sarah, who apparently could make a 7-layer cake while simultaneously deep cleaning the baseboards and hand-washing David's work shirts. Every family gathering became a subtle competition I didn't even know I was losing. When I'd offer to help with holiday cooking, Linda would smile sweetly and say, "Oh, honey, you just sit and relax. I know the kitchen isn't really your thing." When I'd try to contribute to business conversations, Robert would interrupt with, "Maya, why don't you go see if the ladies need help with anything?" And David? He just sat there letting it happen. Sometimes he'd even join in, making little jokes about my domestic challenges that made his family laugh and made me feel smaller each time. The breaking point came at that family barbecue 3 months ago. I had reached my limit with the subtle digs and not-so-subtle comparisons. But what happened next, what David said that night, crossed a line I didn't even know existed. It was the moment I realized I had 2 choices: continue pretending to be someone I wasn't, or show them exactly who Maya Rodriguez really is. Trust me, I chose the latter. And the look on their faces when they realized the truth, absolutely priceless. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the story of how I ended up hiding my success is almost as unbelievable as the story of how I revealed it. 4 years ago, I was scouting locations for what would eventually become Bella Vista. I had just finished my externship at Le Bernardin in New York, spent 2 years as a sous chef at a James Beard award-winning restaurant in Chicago, and saved every penny to open my own place. I was 28, ambitious, and absolutely terrified that I was about to risk everything on a dream. I was checking out this gorgeous historic building downtown when I literally bumped into David at a coffee shop across the street. He was there for some marketing meeting. I was there stress eating a croissant and going over lease documents for the hundredth time. When he asked what I did, I panicked and said I worked in hospitality management. Technically true, right? I mean, running a restaurant is definitely hospitality management, just with a lot more knife skills involved. David seemed impressed by my management role and started talking about his own career ambitions. He was charming, funny, and he actually listened when I talked about wanting to create experiences that brought people together. Of course, he thought I meant like event planning or hotel management, but I let him think that because honestly, it was refreshing to have someone interested in me as a person rather than immediately asking if I could cook for them. Our first few months were incredible. David was supportive, encouraging, and he seemed genuinely excited about my career goals. When I told him I was thinking about starting my own business, he said he'd help however he could. I thought I'd found someone who would celebrate my success, not feel threatened by it. But then I met his family. The first red flag should have been when Linda opened the door and immediately looked me up and down like she was appraising livestock. "Oh, you're much taller than I expected," she said, which I later learned was Linda speak for "I don't approve." Robert barely looked up from his newspaper when David introduced me, just grunted something about hoping I was good enough for his son. But the real wake-up call came when Jessica pulled me aside in the kitchen and started grilling me about my 5-year plan. When I mentioned wanting to open my own business, she laughed and said, "Oh, honey, David needs someone who can take care of home first. His career is really taking off and he's going to need a supportive wife, not another competitor." That's when they started talking about Sarah. Apparently, Sarah could make a pot roast that would bring grown men to tears, kept David's apartment so clean you could eat off the floors, and had already planned out their future children's college funds before they'd even gotten engaged. Sarah was the gold standard, and I was clearly fool's gold. The pressure started immediately. Every family gathering became a test I didn't know I was taking. Linda would make elaborate meals and then sigh dramatically about how some girls just don't have the cooking gene. Robert would ask pointed questions about my little management job while praising David's real career. Jessica would make comments about how important it was for wives to support their husbands' dreams instead of chasing their own. And slowly, David started changing. The man who used to encourage my ambitions began making little jokes about my kitchen disasters and my career phase. When I'd work late on business plans, he'd complain that I was never home anymore. When I'd get excited about a new recipe or restaurant concept, he'd smile indulgently like I was a child playing dress-up. So I made a decision that I'm still not sure was right or wrong. I decided to keep my restaurant dreams separate from my relationship. When Bella Vista's lease got approved, I told David I was consulting for a new restaurant. When we hired our first staff, I said I was helping with management training. When we started getting incredible reviews and booking out weeks in advance, I pretended I just happened to know the owner. For 2 years, I lived this double life. By day, I was Maya Rodriguez, successful restaurateur, boss of 30 employees, the chef who food critics were calling a rising star in the culinary world. By night, I was Maya Chen, the wife who couldn't figure out how to make David's shirts as crisp as Sarah used to, who burned dinner just often enough to maintain the illusion. I was exhausted from being two different people, but I was also terrified of losing the man I loved by being too much of who I really was. The breaking point came on a sweltering Saturday in July at Robert and Linda's annual summer barbecue. I should have known it was going to be a disaster when Linda called the night before to remind me not to bring anything because we all know how your potato salad turned out last time. For the record, there was nothing wrong with my potato salad, but apparently it wasn't traditional enough for the Chen family standards. I walked into that backyard already feeling defeated, wearing a sundress that Linda had once described as interesting, which in Linda speak meant completely inappropriate. David was immediately absorbed into some conversation with his dad about baseball statistics, leaving me to navigate the social minefield alone. Linda was holding court by the grill, orchestrating the entire event like a 5-star general. "Maya, sweetie, why don't you grab yourself a drink and just relax?" she said with that saccharine smile that never reached her eyes. "I've got everything under control here." When I offered to help prep the vegetables, she actually shooed me away with her spatula. "Oh, honey, you just enjoy yourself. I know cooking isn't your strong suit." The sting of that comment was still fresh when Robert decided to join the conversation. He was flipping burgers with the confidence of a man who believed grilling was the pinnacle of culinary achievement. "You know, Maya, Linda's been perfecting her barbecue sauce recipe for 20 years. Some things just can't be rushed or learned from books." I bit my tongue, thinking about the sauce I'd developed for Bella Vista that had food critics comparing it to Kansas City legends. Instead, I smiled and nodded like the good, supportive wife I was pretending to be. But then Jessica arrived, fresh from some client meeting, wearing a power suit and an attitude that could cut glass. She immediately launched into this story about closing some major deal, and suddenly everyone was fascinated by her career achievements. When she finished, Robert clapped her on the back and said, "That's my girl. Always knew you had the business gene." I saw an opening and tried to contribute something to the conversation. "That's really impressive, Jessica. I've been working on some business development projects too, and the client management aspect is definitely the most challenging part." The look Jessica gave me could have wilted lettuce. "Oh, Maya, that's cute. But there's a big difference between actual business strategy and, whatever hospitality management involves." She said hospitality management like it was code for professional party planner. Robert jumped in with his signature condescension. "Maya, why don't you go help Linda with the dessert setup? Leave the business talk to the professionals." That's when I felt something inside me crack. Here I was, someone who managed profit and loss statements, employee schedules, inventory systems, and vendor relationships for a business that was outperforming most restaurants in the city, being dismissed like I couldn't handle adult conversation. But the real humiliation was yet to come. As we sat down to eat, Linda started her annual interrogation disguised as family conversation. "So, David, when are you two going to give us some grandchildren? You're not getting any younger, you know." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we've talked about this. We're focusing on our careers right now." Jessica, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, leaned forward with fake concern. "But Maya, don't you think it's time to prioritize family? I mean, David's career is really taking off. He needs a supportive partner, not more distractions." I felt my face burning. I am supportive, and my career is important too. That's when Jessica delivered the line that still makes my blood boil. "Well, maybe it's for the best that you don't have kids yet. I mean, what would you teach them? She can barely take care of herself, let alone a family." The table went quiet except for Robert's chuckle. Linda tried to look disapproving but couldn't hide her smirk. And David, my husband, the man who was supposed to have my back, he didn't defend me. Instead, he looked around the table, saw his family's expectant faces, and chose them over me. "You know what? You're absolutely right, Jess." David's voice carried across the backyard like a slap. "She can't cook. She can't clean. She's pretty much useless around the house. I honestly don't know what I was thinking when I married her." The entire family erupted in laughter. Robert was practically slapping his knee. Linda was covering her mouth in mock surprise, and Jessica looked triumphant. Meanwhile, I sat there feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, watching the man I loved reduce me to nothing for his family's entertainment. That was the moment I realized I was done pretending to be less than I was. I excused myself from that table so fast I nearly knocked over my chair. "Just need to use the restroom," I mumbled. But honestly, I was about 3 seconds away from either crying or screaming, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing either. I locked myself in Linda's pristine powder room, the one with the motivational quotes about family and the perfectly arranged hand towels that nobody was actually supposed to use. I stared at myself in that mirror, and for the first time in months, I saw Maya Rodriguez looking back at me instead of Maya Chen, the apologetic wife who couldn't do anything right. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I had Carlos, my restaurant manager, on speed dial, and thank God he picked up on the second ring. "Maya? Everything okay? You sound weird." "Carlos, I need you to do me a favor, and I need you to not ask questions right now." "Okay, shoot." "Can you get us a table for 6 this Thursday night? Our best table, the one by the window overlooking the garden." There was a pause. "Maya, we're booked solid through next month." You know that. I'm not asking as a customer, Carlos. I'm asking as your boss. Another pause, longer this time. This is about David's family, isn't it? Carlos had been with me since day one. He'd watched me stress about keeping my two lives separate, had covered for me when David would call the restaurant looking for me, thinking I was just consulting there. He knew exactly what this was about. Thursday is our anniversary, I said, my voice getting steadier with each word. 4 years of marriage, and I think it's time my husband met his wife. Well, this is going to be good. What do you need? Everything, Carlos. I want Marcus to prepare the tasting menu, the full 7 courses. I want our best wine pairings. I want the table set with the Waterford crystal and the imported linens. And Carlos, I want you to make sure some of our regulars are there that night, the ones who know me. I could hear him grinning through the phone. The Hendersons will be there Thursday. They've been coming every week since we opened, and they always ask about you. And the Johnsons have a standing reservation for Thursdays. Perfect. And Carlos, when Marcus does his chef's rounds that night, I want him to be extra enthusiastic about introducing the owner. Maya, this is either going to be the most satisfying night of your life or the end of your marriage. Honestly, I'm okay with either outcome at this point. I hung up and took a deep breath. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like myself again. I wasn't some inadequate wife who couldn't measure up to an ex-girlfriend's pot roast. I was Maya Rodriguez, the woman who had built something incredible from nothing, who employed 30 people, who had food critics calling her innovative and inspiring. But I wasn't done planning. I called Sarah, my general manager Sarah, not the perfect ex-girlfriend Sarah, and filled her in on the plan. Are you sure about this? She asked. Once this cat's out of the bag, there's no putting it back. Sarah, they called me useless. My own husband called me useless and laughed about it with his family. I'm done being ashamed of what I've accomplished. The next call was to Marcus, my head chef. Maya, what's this about a special anniversary dinner? Marcus, remember that conversation we had about cooking being an act of love? Well, Thursday night, I'm going to show someone exactly how much love I've been cooking with for the past 2 years. When I finally walked back out to that backyard, David looked at me with mild concern. You okay? You were gone for a while. I'm perfect, I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. Actually, I have an announcement. For our anniversary Thursday, I've made us reservations somewhere special. I've invited your parents and Jessica too. I want to celebrate with the whole family. Linda perked up immediately. Oh, how lovely. Where are we going? It's a surprise, I said, smiling in a way that probably should have made them nervous. But I promise you, it's going to be a night none of us will ever forget. David looked pleased but slightly worried about the expense. Maya, you know we should be saving money. Don't go overboard. Don't worry, honey, I said, still smiling. I think you'll find the price is exactly right. The next 3 days were the longest of my life, but also the most liberating. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. Thursday night arrived, and I had never felt more nervous or more ready for anything in my entire life. I chose my outfit carefully, a black dress that screamed success, the Tiffany necklace I'd bought myself when Bella Vista turned its first profit, and heels that made me feel like I could conquer the world. David was fidgeting with his tie in the car. Are you sure about this place, Maya? I looked it up online, and the reviews are incredible, but the prices... He whistled low. This is going to cost us a fortune. Don't worry about the money tonight, I said, applying lipstick in the visor mirror. Just focus on enjoying yourself. Robert was already complaining before we even parked. I still don't understand why we couldn't just go to that steakhouse we always go to. This place looks pretentious. Linda was craning her neck to see the building. It is quite fancy, isn't it? Maya, are you sure you can afford this? I mean, we don't want you two going into debt over dinner. Trust me, I said, stepping out of the car. I can handle it. Walking into Bella Vista felt like coming home. The hostess, Maria, recognized me immediately but played it perfectly cool. Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. Your table is ready. I watched David's eyebrows shoot up. Rodriguez? She thinks your last name is Rodriguez. I use my maiden name for reservations sometimes, I said smoothly. You know, for security reasons. The restaurant was buzzing with energy. Every table was full, the lighting was perfect, and the atmosphere was exactly what I dreamed it would be when I first signed that lease 4 years ago. I could see Carlos across the room, giving me a subtle thumbs up. As we were seated at my favorite table, the one with the perfect view of the open kitchen, I watched David's family take in their surroundings. Robert was studying the wine list with the intensity of a man trying to figure out how much this dinner was going to cost his son. Linda was inspecting the silverware, probably looking for spots. Jessica was taking photos of everything for her Instagram, clearly impressed despite herself. "This place is actually really nice," Jessica admitted grudgingly. "How did you even know about it?" "I have my sources," I said, trying not to smile too widely. David was still looking uncomfortable. "Maya, seriously, we should look at the prices. Maybe we should just order appetizers and—" "David," I interrupted, "it's our anniversary. Let me handle this." The first few courses were incredible. Marcus had outdone himself with the tasting menu. I watched my in-laws' skepticism slowly melt away as they tasted food that was clearly on a completely different level from anything they'd ever experienced. Even Robert grudgingly admitted the lamb was not bad. But I was waiting for the main event. About halfway through dinner, I saw Marcus emerge from the kitchen for his usual evening rounds, greeting regular customers and checking on new ones. The Hendersons waved at me from across the room, and I waved back, pretending not to notice David's confused look. Marcus was making his way around the dining room, and my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Finally, he reached our table, and his face broke into that warm smile I'd come to love about my head chef. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby tables. "I hope you're enjoying everything tonight." "The food is exceptional," Robert said, and I could tell he was genuinely impressed. "I'm so glad to hear that," Marcus replied. Then he turned to me, and I saw the twinkle in his eye that meant he was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. "Maya, I had no idea you were dining with us tonight as a guest instead of working. Everyone," he said, his voice getting louder and more animated. "I'd like you to meet Maya Rodriguez, the owner and founder of Bella Vista." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the kitchen exhaust fan 2 rooms away. David's fork, which had been halfway to his mouth with a perfect bite of duck confit, fell from his hand and clattered against his plate so loudly that several other diners turned to look. Robert's face went through about 5 different shades of red in the span of 3 seconds. Linda's mouth fell open, and for the first time in 4 years, she was completely speechless. Jessica just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Marcus, completely unaware of the bomb he'd just dropped, continued enthusiastically. "Maya opened this place 2 years ago, and we've been booked solid ever since. She's been nominated for James Beard Rising Star Chef of the Year, and Food and Wine just named us one of the top 10 new restaurants in the country." He clapped David on the shoulder. "You're a lucky man. Your wife is absolutely incredible." David finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Owner? Maya, what is he talking about?" I took a sip of wine, the 2015 Barolo that I'd personally selected for our wine list, and looked my husband directly in the eye. "I'm talking about the fact that while you've been telling your family I'm useless, I've been running a restaurant that brings in more revenue than your marketing firm." Robert, still trying to process what he'd just heard, quietly said to David, "Son, you married up. Way, way up." David didn't say another word for the rest of the night. The rest of that dinner was the most surreal hour of my life. David sat there in complete shock, mechanically eating the remaining courses without tasting anything. Robert kept clearing his throat and asking questions about the business like he was suddenly interested in my little hobby. Linda, for once in her life, had absolutely nothing to say. And Jessica. She kept staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. The drive home was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that car. David gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to process everything. When we pulled into our driveway, he finally spoke. "How long, Maya?" 2 years, I said quietly. 2 years. He repeated it like he was testing how the words felt. "You've been lying to me for 2 years." "I wasn't lying, David. I was protecting myself. He got out of the car and went straight to the guest bedroom. I didn't see him again until the next morning. When he finally emerged around 10 a.m., he looked like he hadn't slept at all. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, and he just stood there in the doorway for the longest time before finally asking the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you tell me?" I set down my mug and really looked at him. "Do you honestly need me to answer that question?" "Yes, I do. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I accomplish. But your family made it clear that who I am wasn't enough. And David, you let them. You not only let them tear me down, you joined in." He sat down across from me, and I could see something breaking in his eyes. "Maya, I had no idea." "You had every idea," I interrupted. "You knew exactly what they were doing to me, and you chose to be embarrassed by me instead of proud of me. Do you know what that felt like? Watching the man I love reduce me to nothing for a few laughs?" The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. David admitted things I'd suspected but never wanted to believe. He told me he felt intimidated by successful women because of his own insecurities. He said he thought if I was too accomplished, I'd eventually leave him for someone better. So he was more comfortable with the idea of a wife who needed him rather than one who was building an empire. "I sabotaged us," he said, and I could see he was finally understanding the weight of what he'd done. "I made you feel like you had to choose between being successful and being loved." "David, I never wanted you to feel threatened by my success. I wanted you to be proud of it. I wanted to share it with you." That's when he broke down completely. This grown man sitting at our kitchen table, crying over what he'd almost lost. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." But sorry wasn't enough, and I told him that. I gave him an ultimatum that morning. Either he could learn to be genuinely proud of who I really am and stand up to his family when they disrespected me, or we needed to separate. I wasn't going to spend another day of my life pretending to be smaller than I was to make him comfortable. David chose to fight for us. He started therapy the following week to work on his insecurities and his need to control our relationship dynamic. More importantly, he had a difficult conversation with his family about their treatment of me and their expectations for our marriage. Robert and Linda apologized eventually, though it took several months and some very uncomfortable family meetings. Robert actually became one of Bella Vista's biggest supporters. He brings all his business associates there now and brags about his successful daughter-in-law. Linda still struggles sometimes, but she's trying, and I appreciate the effort. The biggest surprise was Jessica. After the initial shock wore off, she became my biggest champion. She started bringing her clients to the restaurant, and we actually developed a real friendship once she stopped seeing me as competition and started seeing me as inspiration. But here's what I learned through all of this. You should never, ever dim your light to make someone else comfortable. The right people will celebrate your success, not resent it. They'll want to lift you up, not tear you down. And if someone can't handle your success, that's their limitation, not yours. Bella Vista is expanding to a second location next year, and David has become my biggest supporter. He brings clients to the restaurant constantly and introduces me as my wife, the chef, and owner, with genuine pride in his voice. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who need to learn the biggest lessons. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply being undeniably, unapologetically successful. So that's my story. From being called useless to owning the restaurant where my husband's jaw hit the floor. It's been 2 years since that anniversary dinner, and I can honestly say it was the turning point that saved both my marriage and my sense of self. If you're hiding your light to make someone else comfortable, I hope my story gives you the courage to shine as brightly as you deserve. You don't need anyone's permission to be successful, and the right people will celebrate your victories, not diminish them. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever felt like you had to downplay your achievements to fit someone else's expectations? How did you handle it? Your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm show these stories to people who need to hear them. And if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself and reclaiming your power, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Remember, you're not too much. You're exactly enough. Keep shining, and I'll see you in the next story.